All right, so we are moving on to the second part, and perhaps the most the eventful and the longest part of the novel, and that is the part narrated by this unnamed male protagonist, who is Antoinette's husband, who they have just gotten married. And from extrapolating from Jane Eyre, we know that it is Rochester and Antoinette who are married. And here we see the dynamics of their relationship. Now, the dynamics of their relationship are built on the gender relations or the gendered ideologies of the time, and also on the colonial and racial ideologies, much of which we have discussed in the earlier session in part 1, in the relationship between Mason and Annette Cosway. But gender relationships are extremely important, especially the economics of these relations. So we see how things like property law make in England, right? Property laws of England have an effect on individual lives, on people, on individual lives in Caribbean. So as a woman, Antoinette, Mr. Mason is kind enough, or he does his duty, or what's wrong or what's right with by his stepchildren. So he leaves an inheritance for Antoinette. Maybe he feels guilty for whatever happened during his second marriage. We do not really hear from Mr. Mason, but we know that he leaves an inheritance for Antoinette. But Antoinette cannot inherit. The inheritance is settled on her. When she gets married, the property would go from to her husband. So in a way, it's not the inheritance that is settled on her, but the dowry. She's an heiress because she brings a big dowry, but she does not really own anything, or she cannot make any use of that financial or economic power that money brings. And Rochester, what about Rochester? As we discussed earlier, he's the second son. He's the second son of his father, so he cannot inherit anything. Only the oldest son can inherit. So the second son has to go out and seek his fortune, make his fortune. And most of the colonies, they would go to the colonies in the 19th century. That is where the fortunes lay, right? So that is what brings them together, and that is the subtext of this relationship. And we must never forget that the relationship between Antoinette and Rochester is built on this economic subtext. Now, how do Antoinette and Rochester respond to the natives and Caribbean landscape? We saw it earlier. Antoinette likes it. Her response to the sensual lushness, the order, the garden, going to the bush. She enjoys. She feels that she feels comfortable. She has place in that wilderness. So it's like, the way she describes Colibri earlier on at the start of the book, in the first part, we see a kind of sensual lushness. It's almost like a paradise which is now disordered, gone corrupt, with all with Alexander Cosway and his fornication and so on. But she's still comfortable. So she's kind of comfortable in that unkempt surroundings and that unkempt garden, the unkempt estate, Colibri, the unkempt nature of earlier plantations in a way signify the degeneration, the depletion of planters' authority, loss of slavery, loss of their prosperity. But Antoinette, as I said, is comfortable to a large extent with all that. Rochester is extremely uncomfortable, and he's overwhelmed by this in Dominica. Let's read a little bit from the novel itself. So this is an excerpt from the novel again in the second part, I think right at the beginning of the second part, page 4th or 5th. This is when they come to massacre the village in Dominica, and this is how Rochester is looking at the scenery, the landscape. The road climbed upwards. This is where we are reading. The road climbed upwards. On one side the wall of green, on the other a steep drop to the ravine below. We pulled up and looked at the hills, the mountains and the blue-green sea. There was soft, warm wind blowing, but I understood why the porter had called it a wild place. Not only wild, but menacing. It is not only wild, but menacing. Those hills could close in on you, right? It's almost as if the hills would he feels overwhelmed, he feels kind of, menaced by the surroundings. What an extreme green was all I could say, and thinking of Emile calling to the fishermen and the sound of voice, I asked him, they take shortcuts, and so on it goes on. So we see that here the flowers too red, too much blue, too much purple, too much green. The flowers too red, the mountains too high, the hills too near, and the woman is a stranger. Her plead. This is he's talking about his wife here. The woman is a stranger. Her pleading expression annoys me. I have not bought her. She has bought me, or so she thinks. We see that economics, or this whole buying and selling, or this whole trade that this marriage is a kind of a subtext of this novel. I looked down at the coarse mane of the horse. Dear father, and that's now he's planning a red letter to the father. Dear father, the 30,000 pounds have been paid to me without question or condition. That's the dowry that Antoinette has brought in. Quite a big dowry. 30,000 pounds have been paid to me without question or condition. So no questions asked, no conditions. As soon as he got married, he got 30,000. He got this wealth. No provision made for her. There is no provision made for Antoinette. How fair is that? No provision made for her. That must be seen to. I have a modest competence now. I will never be a disgrace to you or to my dear brother, the son you love. No begging letters, no mean requests, none of the furtive, shabby maneuvers of the younger son. I have sold my soul, and you have sold it. And after all, is it such a bad bargain? The girl is thought to be beautiful. She's beautiful, and yet. So that is Rochester's one. He's kind of, he thinks it's almost like a Faustian bargain. Dr. Faustus, you can go and have a look, quickly go and read the story, but selling the soul in return for the wealth, right? So he has sold his soul, he feels, in return for this 30,000 pounds, and he says that he will never be a disgrace, and he's never going to beg and make mean requests of younger sons are prone to do till they make. And he's married this beautiful girl, and yet there is some hesitance there, right? She is still a stranger. Now, an important thing, if you read the novel, is that Antoinette initially resisted this marriage. She did not want to get married. There was nothing. She felt there was nothing in common, and her brother Richard Mason and Rochester, to some extent, coerce into kind of bring her around, and they get married. Earlier also, he's kind of looking at his wife critically, and this is again at the start of the second or third page of part 2. He says, she's kind of, you'll get soaked, Antoinette. Antoinette is going to talk to a woman, and the native woman, and this is how he describes the native woman. Look at that. It's Caro, Antoinette said. They are in Massacre, the town in the village, or this little village town in Dominica. It's Caro, I'm sure it's Caro. Caroline, she called, waving. The woman waved back. They're reading here. The woman waved back. A gaudy old creature in a brightly flowered dress, a striped head handkerchief and gold earrings. You'll get soaked, Antoinette, I said. No, the rain is stopping. She held up the skirt of her riding habit and ran across the street. So we can see Antoinette's comfort and Rochester's discomfort, not only with the landscape but also with the people of Caribbean islands. I watched her critically. She wore a tricorn hat which became her. At least it shadowed her eyes, which were too large and can be disconcerting. She never blinks at all, it seems to me. Long, sad, dark, alien eyes. Creole of pure English descent she may be, but they are not English or European either. And when did I begin to notice all this about my wife Antoinette? After we left Spanish Town, I suppose? For did I notice it before and refuse to admit what I saw? Not that I had much time to notice anything. I was married a month after I arrived in Jamaica, and for nearly 3 weeks of that time I was in bed with fever. So that is what he says happened. That is what he says happened. We see his discomfort. We see that he notices that she is Creole of pure English descent, but they are not really English or European either. They have been tropicalized and Creolized. So even if they are pure English descent, they are not equivalent, or they are not close to being English or European. And again, just like the forest is too green, the sky is too blue, and the flowers are too red, the wife is too beautiful. The eyes are too large and disconcerting, and he notices all these things about her, which kind of we see her as if he's seeing another person. He sees her as if there is no familiarity between them yet. And of course then comes the language here, debased French patois they use in the island. So that is his discomfort, not just with people but also with the surrounding of the landscape, surroundings of the landscape. So that was Antoinette and Rochester's marriage, and their response to the surroundings immediately after marriage, their response to each other immediately after their marriage. We also see that there is a lot of gossip and rumor. The gossips and rumors play an important role in this community, and they also kind of they indicate the social and moral map of the community. Daniel Cosway is especially important here because he is the one who writes that poisoned letter, and later on when Rochester meets him, he makes those scurrilous accusations, and tells him about the madness in the family. And we must remember that to some extent they are true. Annie did lose her mind. There is some kind of illness in the family. Pierre was married, and it did descend into marriage after madness after the home was burned and the son was dead. So what Daniel Cosway tells Rochester carries the seed of truth, but it has been twisted, right? The way he tells him, the way Cosway tells Rochester, it is twisted, it is exaggerated, it is the truth told from a very resentful perspective, right? So, and we know that Cosway has his resentment, and it's very palpable, and it's very fair that he's resentful. He is an illegitimate bastard child of Alexander Cosway, and while he is seeing the other, he's seeing Antoinette, right, being rich and getting married to an English man and getting a better life, we can understand his resentment, right? It is Daniel Cosway seems like a villainous figure, but his resentment and his struggle for legitimacy and his legitimate rights is very real, because slave owners would frequently take advantage of female slaves, have mixed children who belong neither to the owner, the aristocratic white owners, and nor to the slave community. They were mixed race children who belonged nowhere, and they did not have rights, they did not have any place to belong to. So if we talked about earlier plantation as a chronotope, we have this another important element in the plantation, and that is the mixed blood children, the children who are born out of this sexually exploitative relationships, the children who kind of symbolize sexual exploitation at the hands of white planter aristocracy. And Cosway refers to his own yellow skin. Rochester, if you remember, he's repelled by him. He's repelled. There's something repulsive about Daniel Cosway. What is repulsive about Cosway? He is the mix, the pollution, the impurity. That is what is repulsive. The idea of miscegnation, right? Impurity, racial impurity. That is what is repulsive. That is what repels Rochester. And in a way, we already read about his doubts regarding his wife's creolized nature, right? Tropicalized, creolized ancestry, that she is not as good as English or European for that matter. So Daniel Cosway's letter in a way plays upon the thought that Rochester already had about his wife and her degraded creolized ancestry, and this kind of starts a process of progressive loss of love and anything else that Rochester might have felt for Antoinette. That's where it starts. So Daniel Cosway's letter kind of signals of the beginning of the end of their relationship. But where does the relationship break? When does the relationship completely break down? That is important. Does it break with Daniel Cosway's letter, or there is something more to that? Let's go to the book. Let's read once again. However, if we also notice in the earlier part that he says that I was married within 1 month of coming to Jamaica, and in that month I had not been well, and he says that he makes it feel as if he has been coerced into this marriage. He has been forced and kind of cheated into this marriage. But I want you to look at this exchange where the morning before the wedding, Richard Mason burst into my room at the Frasers as I was finishing my cup of coffee. She won't go through with it. She is Antoinette, right? This is the day of the wedding. Won't go through what? Richard, Mr. Mason's son and Antoinette's half brother, he says, she won't marry you. But why? She doesn't say why. She must have some reason. Now look at Rochester here. He's trying, earlier on he's told us that he was cheated into this marriage, and earlier on, if you remember the little video that we saw of Jane Eyre, in Jane Eyre also it makes it, the books make it seem as if he was cheated into this marriage. That's what he says. But what happens here? It is Antoinette trying to put up a last fight, she is the one refusing to marry even on the last day. So she must have some reason. She won't give a reason. I've been arguing with the little fool for an hour. We stared at each other, the two men, Richard Mason, who would see to it that the father's wealth goes to the husband, and the husband who wants to marry an heiress because he's a second son. And they are together in this, in a way. They want Antoinette to get married to Rochester. Everything arranged, the presents, the invitation. What shall I tell your father? He seems on the verge of tears. I said, if she won't, she won't. She can't be dragged to the altar. Let me get dressed. Let me hear what she has to say. He went out meekly while I dressed. I thought that this would indeed make a fool of me. I did not relish going back to England in the role of a rejected suitor jilted by his Creole girl. I must certainly know why. So it is Rochester's ego that is hurt when Antoinette refuses to get married on the day of the wedding. She was sitting in a rocking chair with her head bent. Her hair was in two long plaits over her shoulder. From a little distance I spoke gently. What is the matter, Antoinette? What have I done? It's all, look at the pleading in this tone. What is the matter? What have I done? She said nothing. You don't wish to marry me? No, she spoke in a very low voice. She's clear, single word, a monosyllabic answer. No, I do not want to get married. But why? I'm afraid of what may happen. But don't you remember last night I told you that when you are my wife, there would not be any more reason to be afraid, right? So he is the one who made an effort to convince Antoinette to get married to him. Yes, she said. Then Richard came in and you laughed, and I didn't like the way you laugh. You laughed, but I was laughing at myself, Antoinette. Why did the two men share a laugh as if they have made they have gotten their way? And she says, I do not like that laugh, right? It's something that makes me feel uncomfortable. But I was laughing at myself, Antoinette. She looked at me and I took her in my arms and kissed her. You don't know anything about me, she said. I'll trust you if you'll trust me. Is that a bargain? You will make me very unhappy if you send me away without telling me what I have done to displease you. I will go with a sad heart. Your sad heart, she said and touched my face. I kissed her fervently, promising her peace, happiness, safety. But when I said, can I tell poor Richard that it was a mistake, he sat too. She did not answer me, only nodded. So this scene clearly shows that Rochester kind of brought her around. He convinced Antoinette to get married to him, right? So it's not as if he was a victim. He did want to get married, and we know the reason why he wanted to get married to Antoinette. Okay, I want to begin with this little part in little excerpt in part 2, or little portion of part 2 that is not told by Rochester's perspective. It is told in Antoinette's voice. It is Antoinette's meeting with Christophine, and we find Antoinette narrating this. Now, to some extent it is disorienting because sudden shift of the narrative in the middle of the story kind of disorients, and you do not know till you have read a little while that the voice has shifted and it is Antoinette, and we are hearing Antoinette and not Rochester. Now this kind of shifting, broken, not really broken, but the narration, which is shifting narration. So the first part by Antoinette, the second by Rochester. In the middle we have Antoinette's voice, and then going on back to Rochester, and then the final part by Mad Woman in the Attic. And this kind of breakdown is in a way, I would say, a signifier of post-colonial experience, where the linear narrative, like Jane Eyre, where linear Bildungsroman, this happened and then this happened, a kind of linear, neat narrative is not possible because the experiences of a post-colonial subject, a post-colonial person, a person who has experienced colonial violence, a person who has experienced that exploitation, they are in a colony, they are in a post-colonial narrative. The experience of colonialism is expressed in this fragmentation. The narrative cannot be neat and linear. The experiences have become messy. The structures, what could have been a straight, happy childhood has become messy because of history of slavery, colonial exploitation, and so on. So in a way, the fragmented narrative, the broken narrative, signals that fragmentation of a colonial subject. And herein it is also important that not only is the narrative broken, we cannot trust the narrator. And we just saw the example where Rochester would have us believe that he has been forced into this marriage, but if we read it carefully, we realize that he was not forced. So the narrator is himself unreliable, right? We do not really trust, and that kind of completely break down in part 3, where it's a mad woman narrating the story. So you have to go by her understanding and so on. So the unreliability of the narrative and also the fragmentation of the narrative in a way signifies the messiness of colonial experience, or the messiness of a post-colonial psyche. Now this part of the novel where she meets Christophine is narrated in Antoinette's voice, and it is her account of the meeting with Christophine. And we know that what is Christophine's advice when she goes that my husband is falling out of love with me. She says that all women, all colors, nothing but fools. 3 children I have, one living in this world, each one a different father, but no husband. I thank my God. I keep my money, I don't give it to worthless men. So he says basically, keep your money, don't give it to worthless men, become independent. And Antoinette cannot comprehend this. Where must I go? When must I go? Where must I go? And Christophine says that you are a rich person, just walk out of this marriage. And she says, it is English law, I don't have anything, it belongs to him. I have no money of my own at all, everything I had belongs to him. And Christophine does not understand that. She says, what you tell me here? And she says, it's English law. And Christophine thinks that it can be fixed, it can be turned around. Christophine does not trust Rochester, and she advises Antoinette to get out of the marriage. It is Antoinette who does not want. What does Antoinette want? Antoinette wants the husband to fall in love with her once again. She wants that, that intimacy once again. Just like we discussed earlier, why does Jane come back? She's independent, free woman, yet she comes back to Rochester. Similarly, this Antoinette also wants Rochester's love. So in a way, husband's love validates their social status. Husband's love validates them. So that is what is most important to them as women. So not the money, not independence, but husband's marriage and husband's love. That's where they're still seeking validation. So, and what does Antoinette ask of Christophine is some charm, something to make the husband fall back in love with her. She wants, as I said, the intimacy again. And Christophine, Christophine advises her not to dabble with these things. Bad trouble come when Becky is the white people. So when Becky meddle with that, so he says Christophine tries to dissuade her, but Antoinette is not dissuaded. She wants something so that the husband falls back in love with her. And Christophine repeatedly advises, like, here, if the man don't love you, I can't make him love you. And Antoinette argues back, yes you can, I know you can. That is what I wish, and that is why I came here. You can make people love or hate or die. And Christophine is unable to dissuade her, and she gives something, but with a lot of misgivings, and she says that it is not good if white people meddle with it. We also realize here that by this time Rochester has already started calling her Bertha. He never calls good night Bertha. He never calls me Antoinette now. He has found it was my mother's name. I hope you will sleep better, Bertha. And so, it's Antoinette is like Annette, her mad mother. So they give a new kind of, Rochester is giving her a new identity. From Antoinette Cosway, she's slowly becoming Bertha Mason on Rochester's insistence. But yeah, Christophine has already told her, you talk foolishness. Even if I make him come to your bed, I cannot make him love you. Afterward, he hate you. So it's kind of foreshadowing the breakdown of the marriage. And Antoinette says, no. And what do I care if he does? He hates me now. I hear him every night walking up and down the veranda, up and down. When he passes my door, he says, good night, Bertha. And he never really calls me Antoinette now. What happens when Antoinette goes to Antoinette goes to talk to Christophine? When Antoinette is talking to Christophine, Rochester is talking to Daniel Cosway, and she comes back with some kind of a charm to make him, she thinks that it would make him fall in love with her. Christophine has already warned her. Rochester comes back with more misgivings about his wife, the madness in her Creole ancestry, and so on. However, they have a talk. They talk about it. She tells him about Daniel Cosway. She tells him about the mother. She tells him about, they share. And and after that they share the dinner and they have their talk. She insists, Antoinette is the one who insists on talking. She's the one who insists on talking, and she lets him know that she went to Christophine and so on. But what happens after that? They are once again they're feeling that intimacy, even when she has not yet used the so-called charm. Your mouth is colder than my hands, she said. I try to laugh. In the bedroom, I close the shutters. Sleep now, we will talk things over tomorrow. So there is some kind of hope of renewal of their relationship here. We will talk things over tomorrow. Yes, she said, of course. But will you come in and say good night to me? Certainly I will, my dear Bertha. Not Bertha tonight, she said. Of course, on this of all nights, you must be Bertha. So maybe he is trying to turn her into an image of an English woman that he wants, and not this exotic Caribbean woman called Antoinette Cosway. As you wish, he said. As I stepped into her room, I noticed the white powder strewn on the floor. That was the first thing I asked her about the powder. I asked her what it was. She said it was to keep cockroaches away. And as soon, the word cockroaches again reminds of her childhood and this whole thing of white cockroaches and so on. Haven't you noticed that there are no cockroaches in this house and no centipedes? If you know how terrible these things can be. It seems as if there is kind of a double layer of meaning here. No pests here, no parasites here. Do you know how terrible are these things? Do you know how terrible are these slurs that if you had to grow with it? But it seems to me that there is a meaning here. But she goes on. She had lit all the candles and the room was full of shadows. There were 6 on dressing table, 3 on the table near the bed. The light changed her. I had never seen her look so gay or so beautiful. Is it set up, this setting, 6 on the dressing table, 3 on the table near the bed? Is it the part of the charm? Now that Christophine has advised, we don't know. She poured wine into 2 glasses and handed me one. But I swear, it was before I drank that I longed to bury my face in her hair as I used to do. I said, we are letting ghosts trouble us. Why shouldn't we be happy? This is what he tells her. He wants that intimacy back. He wants that connection back, and he says, we are letting ghosts trouble us, ghosts of the past, we are letting them take over. Why shouldn't we be happy? So as I said, that even before she uses a charm on him, there is some kind of a retrieval of the relationship possible. She said Christophine knows about ghosts too, but that is not what she calls them. She need not have done what she did to me. And that is Rochester saying, she, his wife Antoinette, need not have done what she did to me. I will always swear she need not have done it. When she handed me the glass, she was smiling. I remember saying in a voice that was not like my own that it was too light. I remember putting out the candles on the table near the bed, and that is all that I remember. All I will remember of the night. So, and later on he wakes up as if he was buried alive. I was awake, and the feeling of suffocation, as if she has sucked out his will. She has, taken over his will. She has forced him into this relationship. And that is where I think the relationship turns, and it's the point of no return. The next day he wakes up, he feels all the effects, he feels that he has been suffocated, buried alive. I thought I have been poisoned, right? That's what he feels that has been done to him. I have never made a greater effort in my life than I made then. I longed to lie there and sleep, but forced myself up. I was weak, giddy, but no longer sick or in pain. I put on my dressing gown and splashed water on my face, and I opened the door into her room, and so on. And then he sees his wife, very beautiful, and so on. But it is already over. The relationship is already over. So as I said, both of them have a hand in the breakdown of the relationship. Antoinette Christophine advises her to withdraw herself from the loveless marriage, from this exploitative marriage. When there is no identity for a woman like Antoinette beyond this, there is no identity for a woman like Antoinette beyond this marriage. There is no place for her, as we discussed earlier on, in the Caribbean society. So she insists on seeking validation. The validation of her identity comes by her marriage, by making her unloving husband fall in love with her. What does Rochester do after that? What does Rochester do when he wakes up? He immediately sleeps with one of the female servants in the next room where his wife could hear and know about this episode. So he kind of inflicts the maximum psychological damage on Antoinette. It is here, and both of them have equal part to play in this point of no return, in this very crucial turnaround in the plot. You might also consider how different is Rochester from Cosway, who had number of illegitimate affairs. Rochester, to get back at his wife, goes and has an affair with one of the servant girls. So overall, I think part 2 gives us an account of how marriage is a slow withdrawal of independence, especially economic independence, but also in a way her emotional independence. She's emotionally dependent on Rochester for the validation that comes with his love, from the validation that comes by the status of being his wife. So the entire relationship is built on that very unequal balance of power that is there, and it is not just in terms of gender relations, it's also in terms of property rights, racial equations. I mean, she is a Creole and Creolized, he thinks that he's superior because he's of pure European descent or pure English descent. So the balance of power is in his favor, whether it comes from gender, from property, from racial equations. It is an marriage built on this inequitable balance of power.